hello, will you please introduce yourself and tell us
Sure.
how you got involved and interested in the field?
Okay, well, I'm Marcy Driscoll. I'm currently Dean of the College of Education at Florida State University. And I actually got interested in the field back when I was an undergraduate. And I don't know why, I just got enamored of programmed instruction and thought, what a cool thing to do. You know, it just seemed like it would be something that would be a solution to a learning problem. And so I actually developed, as an undergraduate, a programmed instruction module that was used in a laboratory class that I was taking in psychology. And one of my faculty members at that time is a woman by the name of Ellen Reese, who was very well known at the time in she was a close personal friend of B.F. Skinner and somebody who did a lot of work in applied behavior analysis and in behavior modification. And so I really have to credit her with being the person, probably in the experiences I had with her, of getting me interested in this field.
Oh, that's fascinating. You don't hear of too many people who really do have sort of a, well, at least partial link to B.F. Skinner.
Exactly.
That's great.
Well, in fact, she was responsible for bringing him to my college when I think I was a senior. So I had the opportunity to meet him in person and had dinner with him at her house. So I have to say, it was just an amazing experience. And, you know, I think that was sort of the spark that got me interested in this field.
Fascinating. Now, with that as your introduction, then, can you briefly tell us a little bit about how your career progressed then?
Wow. Okay. So I with a degree in psychology, it's like, what do you do with that? You can only go on to graduate school. And so I went down the road, actually had done an honors thesis, research thesis, and the person who served as an outside member of that ultimately became my major professor at the University of Massachusetts. And it was there I was really introduced to the rest of psychology. So the cognitive revolution was occurring about that time. So I got introduced to cognitive psychology, worked for a cognitive psychologist. But the whole time I was in graduate school, my interest was in how do we make sense of these theories? What do they tell us about instruction? Not just how people learn, but how do you use that knowledge to improve instruction? That was always my interest, and so I was always pushing toward the more applied end of the field. And so my intent was to be an instructional designer. That's what I thought I wanted to do. And I had somehow or other gotten a copy of the Dick and Carey book, and so I was sort of carried that around as a Bible. But what I didn't realize, and what I only understand now in retrospect, is that my degree, my PhD, was very research oriented, and that I was really being prepared for faculty and academic life, but was not my choice. So when I left, finished my degree, my first job out of graduate school was in Iran. I was an instructional designer and working with a small team where we were developing a course of instruction for people who worked for the National Iranian Radio and TV. At that time, the Shah was in power. He was interested in improving literacy levels in the country, but Iran is a big country and big cities, and most of the work was being pushed out to rural areas, and the way they planned to do it was through radio and TV. So we were trying to help these people build instruction for delivery by radio and TV. So I was there for not quite 2 years. Revolution started. I was there when it started. That's another whole story. And eventually we were told we had to leave. So I wasn't allowed out initially, but again, that's another interesting story. But when I left, I went back to Amherst, Massachusetts, where I had gotten a job offer to work for a company called National Evaluation Systems as a project director. This was a company that did a lot of test development for national competency testing programs. I did primarily program evaluation, directed a large-scale study of competency-based testing. But as we went along, the longer I was there, the more I realized I was not a good fit I didn't like the corporate bottom line, that decisions were being made based on money, not based on professional kinds of reasons. So almost exactly, well, it was exactly 1 year to the day I started, I resigned. I went to the Office of Mental Health in New York State, where I was an instructional designer. That was working for the Office of Mental Health. We were doing training for people that were, this was during a time where we were moving from mental health institutions, moving people into more community-based settings. So a lot of retraining of staff that were going on. So I was involved in developing instruction to retrain staff. And it was while I was doing that, commuting, living in Massachusetts, commuting to New York, when a friend of mine called me and said, Florida State University has a job. They're looking for you, but they just don't know it yet. You need to apply to this job. So I said, okay. By that time, I realized, I have a research interest. A whole lot of things I don't know that I'd like to conduct research on. And so I applied. So did my very best friend in the world at the time. He was somebody I had hired into National Evaluation Systems. The more I got to know him, the more I realized if I was leaving, so was he. We were too much alike. We get to Florida State. We were the two finalists.
Dear.
Yeah, no, it was great because Walter Dick was the chair of the search committee, and at one point Walt picked me up and we're on our way to the building, and he said, I noticed that this other guy he worked at the same place you did. Do you know him? I said, of course I do. He's my best friend. And Walt said, and you're okay with that? I'm like, yeah, one of us has a good job. One of us is going to be successful. That was, and it was clear after the interviews that I was the person who would get the nod, because I did have more practical experience than he did. And FSU at that time was very much of a more practice-oriented program. That's what it was built on. And for me, it was just an amazing opportunity because I already knew Walter Dick's work. I already knew Bob Gagne's work. I already knew Bob Branson's work. So I was like, wow, I'm going to where they invented instructional design. That was sort of my sense of it anyway. And it was an amazing experience. And I've been at Florida State now for 35 years. I did spend 1 year away at Arizona State. But yeah, so been there a long time.
Now, your friend, did he ever get the different position that he was happy with?
He did. He's been at Duquesne University for a very long time. We were actually department chairs around the same time. He was interim dean the year before I became a dean. We have remained very close for many, many years. We've published together. We've written for one another's faculty, promotion and tenure, and he's somebody I always look forward to seeing every year. So yeah, it has a happy ending.
Good ending.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
And so then that's up to today, and your current position. Can you tell us a little about that?
Sure. I am currently the dean. I am one that rose up through the ranks, so I went assistant associate full, became a department chair, and I succeeded Bob Reeser as department chair, my very close colleague. And it's generally around that time that you make a decision as a faculty member. Do you want to go up in administration, or do you want to kind of go back to faculty? Our department was one where we'd had long-standing chairs. So the chair that hired me had been chair 10 years, I think. Bob Reeser was chair about 10 years. I was chair 7 years. And it was during that time that I realized that I really enjoy faculty development. Part of the best parts of the job are helping faculty be successful and to rise in the ranks and to do the things that they want to do. And I realized I had a talent for it, that I was pretty good at it. And so I had an opportunity the dean that preceded me asked me to serve as an associate dean. So I did that for 18 months when he stepped down rather suddenly. And he convinced the provost that they ought to confine the search to internal candidates. because there were two of us, associate deans, that he felt would make good candidates for deans. So I competed and was the person hired, and that was almost 11 years ago. It'll be, I'll finish out my 11th year, I'll start my 12th year in May of 2016. So I've been at this a while. I don't know if most people aren't aware that the average life of a dean is nationally is about 5 years. So I'm now one of the more senior deans at FSU, and actually in the field. So, but it's been a good gig for me. It's been a good fit.
That's excellent. Well, great. Well, tell me a little bit then about your research areas and how it has evolved over time.
We were actually talking a little bit about this at the women's session a little bit ago. And the question that a young lady asked several of us talking is, how did you figure out a research agenda? And Sharon Smaldino and I both answered, we're probably not the best person to ask about that, because I had great difficulty in determining what my agenda was. I'm interested in many different aspects of learning, and so I have done kind of a lot of different things, and it always related to how do you improve learning and how do you use technology to do that. But I would say and this isn't so much research as sort of aggregation, I suppose, of research, is my book, The Psychology of Learning for Instruction. I had already done a little book with Bob Gagne. We had done, he had asked me to be a co-author on a book with him, and I had done a book on, was a ed psych textbook. But when I was teaching the theories of learning at FSU, and casting about, trying to find books that worked, and the book rep from, it was Allen and Bacon, I think, at that time, was talking to me, and I said, you haven't got any good books. And she said, well, why don't you write one? I'm like, me? Me? Write a book? You sure? And it's like, she's like, well, if you don't like, and I said, well, okay, maybe. So I developed a prospectus. They accepted it, and that started me on my way. And I think that's probably my major contribution to the field, has been that more than any sort of specific things in research that I've done.
Well, I know I've gotten a lot out of that book, and everyone I've talked to has as well. So
I'm amazed it's still being used, actually. Which is great. It's nice that it's been used.
What edition is it on now, and do you expect to write
do
a
another
revision?
one? I believe it's currently in the 3rd edition, and that's about 10 years old. Okay. And unfortunately, until I leave administration, I don't have the time to do. In fact, I've been asked that more times this week, as, are you going to do another edition? Maybe, yes. But not until my schedule is my own.
Yes.
But yeah, it
takes a lot of time.
It does. But it's interesting because I know one of the questions is, what about current research? And as a dean, I'm not expected to do research. Mm-hmm. It's not really part of what I do most of the time. But I've had an opportunity in the last year and a half to engage in some research that's been great fun, and it was an opportunity that I couldn't say no to. One of my distinguished alumni at FSU owns an executive search firm. She's one of the major firms in higher education. And she came to me and said, we've learned so much in presidential searches, dean searches, vice presidential searches, that we'd like an opportunity to give back. And I have so many questions, things that really need researching. And she's also seeing a leadership gap looming, or a leadership crisis. And she's saying, in some of the particularly presidential searches, the pools are getting shallower. They're going deeper into them to make suitable hires. Might there be an opportunity to do some research at Florida State? She said, I can get you access to people we've placed if you'd be willing to undertake this. So I put it out there to doc students and said, is there anyone out there who'd be interested in doing this? So summer before last, I just did a little 1-credit seminar, research seminar. I have 6 students who signed up and 2 faculty who've been working with us. And we completed a study. We're in the process now of, we've pretty well finished the data analysis. We're beginning to write it up. But looking at how university presidents prepare for that role. And we confined it to research universities like Florida State. And we kind of looked at a couple of variables, those that either came up through the ranks versus people who went to new institutions that are new to them. And then the second variable being, are you a new president or have you done this before? And so we interviewed 6 sitting presidents, which we would never have gotten access to had we not been able to work with this firm. So I'm getting a little bit of research in now.
That's excellent.
But not in our field, not specifically anyway.
But it's probably contributing because of the nature of it to the field anyway.
Yeah.
Did you by any chance get to interview Kent Fox?
No.
He's my daughter's father-in-law.
No
so
kidding.
If you want,
wow.
we can send him a note if you're still looking for more people to
that would be
talk to. So.
Especially since he's now in my state.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, University of Florida. That's awesome. But we did get people from all over the country, and
awesome.
I have a woman president. I have a person of color. And so, yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Oh, that is. Oh. Now, tell me a little bit about your history then with AECT. Yes.
Well, you know, it's interesting. AECT was not my first association. I was mentored into AERA, and largely because I was coming through a research educational psychology program. And truly I have not missed an AERA since I was a graduate student, so I've been going there a long time. But it was my colleague Bob Reeser, who is an AECT person, and I don't remember what year it was, it had to have been in the 80s, where he said, you ought to come. You'll meet some good people, you know, it's a different, and you're interested in technology, and it's a little more applied than AERA is. You ought to come. So I did. And I did. I met people that I was like, oh, people who are either doing interesting things and that had common interests and so on. And I still remember I signed up for a research and theory division and for the design and development division at the time. And then, I don't know, I'd been a member 2, 3, 4 years, something like that. And I had kind of wanted to I don't know, volunteer, get involved, and wasn't really sure quite how to do it. But I was assuming that I would get involved in research and theory, since that sort of was more consistent with what I do. And it was folks in the design and development division that said, we want you to run for president of the division. And I'm like, nobody knows me. Okay, sure. Because I was quite convinced there's no way in the world I'd get elected. And then, oops, I was. Okay then, somebody must know me. But that's really what started my career in AECT, and it led to, you know, so I sat on the board, and then it led to being elected as a general board member from the leadership, and then ultimately being elected president-elect, and then serving as president. And when I served as president, that was the year that we did some reorganization. We moved the conference to the fall. So I actually served 22 months as AECT president, the only one to do that, and planned 2 conferences in the same year.
Right. Yes.
That was a major thing. But it's been a great place and has become family in many, many ways. The people that I've gotten to know here.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Let me look here real quick. Okay, if you would mind sharing some of the changes that have occurred in the field as you have gone through your years of in the field.
That's hard. I'd say there are probably several that I'll mention. Technology's always been a part of the field, but at Florida State, our part of our identity is in thinking of technology not as hardware, but as process. And that's something that we have a long and proud tradition of models of instructional design, instructional theory, and in considering that sort of technology. But it's interesting, I have seen a movement more toward the hardware side of things, to the device side of things. And even in my own institution, we're seeing more toward, well, they've even added learning technologies to the name of our program. I mean, we were always instructional systems, and now we're instructional systems and learning technologies. And I would certainly say that that's been a trend that I've seen over the years, more and more, that there's combined programs, and there's not a lot that's just focused on process anymore. I think the other area that I hear a lot from our alumni is change management. I was interested to see that we do still have a systemic change division at AECT, but it doesn't seem to be as large as I thought maybe it would be by now, because I see that as something that is happening, certainly in the corporate world, that many of our alumni are doing that work. They're not so much instructional designers anymore. They're performance technologists. They're change managers. I would say that's a change that I've seen over the years.
That's interesting that you should bring that up, and I think too, it strikes me that some of the interpersonal communication skills have kind of gone by the wayside, and I really feel like they need to be brought back, because that's an area that we'll never not need that ability.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's true. I see, it's interesting, one of the things I'd see is very, what's the word I'm looking for, has waxed and waned over the years, is sort of the K-12 work, because I know we as a faculty at one time, we really wanted to attract teachers, K-12 teachers, into our program, and we were not very successful at that somehow. And it seemed sometimes that a lot of our work was not somehow finding its way into the teaching profession. And it seems to me that that's turned some. You know, I see among my teacher education faculty in my own college a much greater interest in how technologies can help them solve learning and teaching problems, and that they're taking some real interest in that. It's become part of their own research in some cases. I don't know that they've been attracted, that group, to AECT particularly, but there is more of a union than it seemed like there was years ago.
It's probably becoming more and more a part of their world, and so they're seeing the need. If they're not coming to AECT, where do you think they're going?
They seem to go to SITE. That's one of, an ISTE maybe, that's an area that they've gone to. But it's also become just part of their own, so NARS, National Association of Research and Science Teaching. There are people that work in technology in there. I think the other societies that are focused on English education and on math education, it's become, certainly in special ed, I mean, the assistive technologies is just a normal part of what they do. So I think it's embedded. I think it's embedded into their
discipline-specific organizations.
Yeah.
That's probably a good thing.
Yes. Yeah, it probably is. But there's sort of, you also have that sense of missed opportunities.
Yes.
You know, where you'd like to see some cross-fertilization of getting some of those folks into AECT, but also, I don't know, maybe opportunities to work more closely together would be cool.
Yes, I would agree. Thank you. Okay, how would you like to be remembered in the field?
I don't know. That's a hard question. I think I'm proud of my book, I have to say. I remember a conversation with Walter Dick, my colleague, many years ago. He's remembered for his book, the Dick and Carey book, and both of us mused at one point. It was sort of like, wow, we never thought that that would be sort of the impact that we would have on the field. And yet, on the other hand, it's something I'm very proud of. But I suppose the other way I'd like to be remembered as a mentor, as somebody who has helped to mentor other people in our field, into administration. And I'm really proud of what my students are doing, the people that have worked with me as an administrator. Several of my associate deans, former associate deans, now are deans, or have been deans before they retired. And so that aspect of mentoring is important to me, and I would like to be remembered as a good mentor, and hopefully, even today, to have a couple of the women on the women's session say that I helped to pave the way for them as a leader in the organization. That's very meaningful and very satisfying.
That's good. Okay, last question. How about some AECT memories? They're publishable.
Oh yes. Well, since I've already there are a number of sessions at this conference that have mentioned Dolly Parton, I'll have to tell that story.
Yes, please do.
And that, first of all, you have to know that I'm a huge Dolly Parton fan, and I love her music, and I love who she is and her personality and so on. So some years ago, and I couldn't tell you exactly when this was, but it was just as I was getting involved in the AECT leadership. I was going to my first summer leadership conference, and I remember thinking at the time, I don't know anybody, right? I mean, I know my own colleagues, but none of them are part of this leadership conference. And a few months before that, I had gotten in the mail a Dolly Parton wig catalog. And my husband and I were kind of flipping through it, and he's like, you ought to get one of those. And I'm like, yeah, that'd be kind of fun. Well, which one? And so I picked one that was, basically your big hair, below shoulder length, the waves and so on, and frosted. It was sort of very classic Dolly Parton. And it's really quite a nice wig. I actually still have it. So I thought, well, I'm going to take it to this conference. Nobody knows me. What the heck? And I'd been told that the last night of the conference, there's a kind of a dress-up dinner. It's a plated meal. We do a silent auction ahead of time, and then an auction afterward, and a nice chance to get dressed up. So I had a really long, pretty sundress. We were in Arizona this time. And at the end of the very last session, I'm standing talking to a group of all men, and said, oh, it's time to I looked at my watch, time to change for dinner. And they said, okay, see you later. So I went, I got in my sundress, and I put this wig on. Now, you have to understand, my hair was every bit as short then as it is now, right? And so when I came back out, the same group was still standing there. And so I stopped and chatted, and I could see them look, and then kind of, look. And finally, they couldn't see, and one of them said, how'd you do that? And then somebody else saying, did you have your hair pinned up before? No, silly. But this has been my experience, that men in general they just assume that it's your hair, right? Women typically don't. So when I did Technology Travesties a year or so after that, I made the wig part of the act, and sort of now that's gotten into sort of AECT lore. And has there been a Dolly Parton sighting lately?
That's excellent.
It was a great deal of fun, I have to say. But there are so many AECT stories. One of the other ones, I have to mention the big pink dog. So have you heard about that?
No.
It's Kyle Peck's band. He actually brought a band 1 year, 2 years maybe, that played at AECT. We used to have a dance at the very end of the conference, and he had a band called the Big Pink Dog. And he said, well, if you're going to be a pink dog, you got to be big. Yeah. So he had black T-shirts with big pink dogs on them that they gave out. It was
great,
and they played great music, and we all danced to it. We had a grand time.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Well, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think you'd like to mention? Anyone that you didn't get to mention that had an impact on your career, or any ideas that?
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the impacts on my career. I mean, I mentioned Ellie, who sort of got me started, but one of the people, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention him, that it had a large impact on my own thinking, was Leslie Briggs. You don't hear so much about Les anymore. I mean, Gagne Briggs, everybody, it's sort of almost one word, Gagne Briggs, right? And everybody knows Bob Gagne's work really well. Les Briggs was the quieter of the two of them. But when I started at FSU, and it was in my second or third year, I was still struggling to figure out what I was going to write about, what my research was going to be about. And Les made the suggestion that, he said, you know, there are a lot, we were all trained as pretty much as experimental psychologists. And that was true even for me. At that time, in cognitive and in educational psychology, as I mentioned, the cognitive revolution had taken place. Everything was very much empirical, experimental design. You didn't learn much else. We didn't even know anything about qualitative. That was never a topic that I was even introduced to as a graduate student. But by the time I was a third or fourth year faculty member, those wars had started, sort of qualitative versus quantitative. And in a faculty meeting at one point, the faculty all agreed we ought to be teaching our candidates about both experimental design and a variety of qualitative designs, that when you look at the kinds of problems that we were beginning to research, you couldn't always answer those questions with experimental designs. We were beginning to see the kind of the rudimentary design-based research was happening at that time. And so all the faculty were like, well, who's going to teach such a class? And then all heads swiveled towards me because I'm the new kid on the block, the youngest one on the faculty. You can do it. I'm like, I don't know anything about this guy. Well, I got some release time and spent time really researching it. And it was with Les's encouragement and sounding board that I not only developed a course that now has been a regular course that we've had on the books at Florida State, but wrote a paper that earned me my first award, actually. It was an Outstanding Paper Award here at AECT in the Division of Instructional Design and Development. And if it hadn't been for Les, I probably never would have written that paper. And when I wrote the first draft, I gave it to him to critique, because he'd made that offer to me. He said, I'm always happy to read your work and give you feedback. But when he did, he gave it back to me, and there's red ink everywhere.
It's bleeding.
It's bleeding, exactly. And he was very shy about it when he handed it to me. And he said, I'm just an old school teacher at heart. Just, you know, if you find the comments useful or helpful, great. If you don't worry about it. But they were all incredibly useful suggestions, and I revised accordingly, had him look at it one more time. And I think had it not been for both his encouragement, his willingness to talk over some of these, I never would have written it. I don't think it would have been as good as it was. And it launched me in a new direction, truly, to begin to do work in a more qualitative, and I began to look at what are those kinds of designs in research designs, and how can they be helpful to researchers in our field. And I ended up writing a series of columns for Educational Technology magazine on some of these different ones that I think have made a contribution and certainly helped to make our students more well-rounded and able to do different kinds of research. So he was very instrumental. I mean, even though I published with Gagne, Les was, very much a behind-the-scenes kind of mentor to me very early on in my career, and it's made a lot of difference. And I would also say, and my administrative mentor was also my colleague Bob Morgan, who was the director of the Learning Systems Institute. And as a director, he understood when I started to get into first department chair, then associate dean, and then the dean's role. He was the one that I went to lunch with on a monthly basis to because he understood and he could talk to me about things, and he was always a really, really kind person to me. So,
Excellent.
yeah.